taking place here, and it's all about the 7th Funda Mzansi Championships, and it's a National Library of South Africa initiative trying to get people to really enjoy the culture of reading. To give you a little bit more background on this, our reporter Sagri Chetty went out and found out more. Let's take a look and see what she did find out.
What others take for granted, this man has proudly embraced. At the age of 65, he now knows how to write his name and surname and even read. It was an impossible task up until this year. He's one of the success stories of this initiative, which is spearheaded by the National Library of South Africa.
Dat betekent vir my baie mevrou. My gesin.
It means so much to me. My family on the outside can't believe that this 65-year-old man can write and tell them what's in that book.
Wat staan in daai boek? Dat ek gaan nou vir die jong mense
I want to tell young people, if you can't read and write, you are going nowhere.
Kan jy nêrens.
This 26-year-old offender has won the competition for 3 years in a row. He impressed judges last year for his critical analysis of Afrikaans book Ek was hier by Nanette van Rooyen.
I participate in analyzing a book in Afrikaans book, which is not my mother tongue. And for me, as an individual, having been winning first place in national competition has been very lucrative in my life, because when I was reading, I was just reading a book just because it's reading, but not understanding it. But being part of this project has taught me to read a book with insight.
Funda Mzansi has grown since it began 7 years ago. It now attracts over 1,500 participants countrywide.
People that don't even know how to read and write, or leave alone sign the names. We have, like you've heard, the testimony of guys that have been able to read and write. So yes, it is important in getting back out onto the community reintegration.
The competition, which ends on Wednesday, hopes to make even greater strides among schools, the community and the prison population in the years to come. Sagri Chetty, SABC News, George.
So that report by Sagri Chetty giving us a little bit more background to the Funda Mzansi Championship and the importance of learning to read, particularly with the Department of Correctional Services, and how inmates have been helping their process of rehabilitation. And one of the people that are kind of part of this project and the thrust of rehabilitating our inmates is the Regional Co-ordinator Education and Training at the Department of Correctional Services here in the Western Cape, Andile Nelani. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the program. Just before the break, we were chatting to Mr. Machumza, who's the director for the Centre for the Book at the National Library of South Africa, and he was very excited that when the Department of Correctional Services joined the project, it's almost as if it came to life in many ways. Tell us about your journey with this book club, Funda Mzansi, and what it's done for the inmates.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to the viewers at home. We started here with Paulsmoor as one management area, participating in the Funda Mzansi project, where we're trying to necessarily create a platform whereby offenders are going to be inculcated their reading skills, analytical skills, so that whatever that they begin to read and understand, they must be able to analyze that, so that it begins to create a canvas on which they are going to be able to plot their own way out of the correctional facilities. So using Funda Mzansi necessarily as that platform that begins to necessarily hone the skills that these guys have, internally in them, so that they can be able to make use of those skills when they get out. To get out as not only law-abiding citizens, but get out as socially responsible global citizens. People are going to be able to take their spaces in the rightful places in the society, so that they are able necessarily to fend for their families in a rightful way. That's what we're trying to do.
All right. How did you encourage them to start the process of reading? Because reading, some of us think it's cool, but it's not something a lot of people think is cool to do.
We've made reading very fun. We started by making sure that we encourage those ones already in education and training programs, but also to make it fun so that people can start creating their own stories. We've got few offenders that started writing their own books. We said we want to necessarily generate a new breed of writers. People are going to bring a new flair, of stories, in the booking arena, so that people can begin to understand the other side, of what is it necessarily to be an incarcerated person. So that's why necessarily we encourage them to start necessarily telling their own stories, not that we tell their own stories, but it should be themselves, talking for themselves and about themselves. So that's what necessarily made them to have interest in the program. And mostly, we wanted to open up a space through the National Library of South Africa so that these guys, when they start writing, they need to be able to produce books so that some of their books that they're producing can also be used by their fellow inmates as tools of studying. That's what we're trying to do.
All right, so in the piece that we saw just now, we saw a young man who's has done quite well over a number of years. Tell us what kind of changes you've seen in the lives of these inmates during and after the incarceration as a result of learning to enjoy reading.
We've managed, in the Western Cape, to be specific, we've got offenders that participated in our book clubs who, after they were released from the correctional facilities, they've managed to establish their own book clubs in the communities. And some of them have started working necessarily in different, enterprises where they can necessarily start fending for themselves. We've got one offender in the Western Cape that's been just employed by Bush Radio, assisting them necessarily in terms of running some of the programs there. So there's quite a very significant impact, because when offenders started coming into the program, from one center and competing with the school from outside, other centers that are not part of it, they could see the direct exchange value, of their participation in the program, what impact it has necessarily in them changing their own lifestyle so that they can necessarily have a positive attitude in their own lives. That's what we've necessarily managed to get.
Is there a changing of mind and attitude? I know that the theme for this year's Funda Mzansi Championship is developing creative minds. What happens to the personality and to the mind of someone who starts reading more regularly?
We've managed to see quite a drastic change in the lives of the guys who are part of the book clubs, because most of them, they started becoming ambassadors in their own correctional facilities by recruiting more guys to be part of the program. You'll find a situation where from the 10 management areas that we've got in the Western Cape, you don't find only one book club. One management area may have more than 5 book clubs. That's the impact that we necessarily make in terms of encouraging. You see, we are using this vehicle, Funda Mzansi, not only as an edutainment. We are using Funda Mzansi as a program that begins to impact positively on the literacy, of the offenders in the correctional facility. Because there's one thing that we are certain about, is that when we begin to give them that tool, they will be able to navigate the world while they're incarcerated, to be able to know exactly what's happening around them. But we want them to understand it differently so that they must take this journey as a journey of generating their own knowledge that can be shared with other people for them to be able to learn from them. That's the whole purpose.
When we look at the story of South Africa and our struggle heroes, a lot of them actually spent a lot of time studying and reading whilst they were incarcerated. And there's this whole journey of you learn to read, and once you've done that, then you're able to read to learn. Have you seen some of your inmates take that journey where once they've started to learn to enjoy reading, that they've started the journey of education proper?
Definitely. A lot of the guys that are part of the book clubs now were people who are not necessarily doing anything in the facilities, but when started coming into the program, they also even volunteered themselves to start assisting others in formal programs. Because what we are doing in correctional services, we don't only run formal, we do also facilitate non-formal programs, so that learning should not necessarily be confined, in a classroom setup, but we want to see learning taking place in every space where there are two people meeting. Because whenever the two meet, they should necessarily be able to influence one another in a very positive way.
I know that you're responsible for the Western Cape, but is this a project that's starting to take resonance in correctional facilities around the country?
Yes, very much so. I just received a call now because we are broadcasting this live. I already received a call from my counterparts, regional coordinators from other regions. Northern Cape Free State phoned me this morning saying, Andile, this is great. I'm happy that National Library of South Africa have managed to necessarily make this so big. We are very much grateful. They are also having different book clubs in different regions, in correctional services. But we want to encourage them to continue necessarily participating in the program.
And provision of books, is that something that you're getting assistance with to make sure that you start these clubs, but they need to be resourced, I guess?
Yes, for sure. The reading, actually, as part of our constitutional mandate, is to make sure that offenders do necessarily get prepared for them to be able to go into the society as rehabilitated individuals. The department would, for every year, provide budget for us to be able to source, material that can necessarily assist them. But to augment that, we do necessarily also open up our facilities so that if there are people who want to come and donate books that are very much useful, we do receive those. Funda Mzansi also support us as a project to try and provide some of the reading material that would want to use necessarily as a facility. So we do have our own budget to try and necessarily ensure that guys, they do get a material that they need to use.
All right, Andile, we're going to have to leave it there. Andile Nelani is the Regional Co-ordinator, Education and Training with the Department of Correctional Services in the Western Cape. So there you have it. It really does make a difference to the lives of many of our inmates. And so if you've got books lying around the house, please donate them to them. It will make a difference in somebody's life in a phenomenal way. And we'll talk to some of those people who've been affected, who were inside and are outside now, and they'll tell us their journey a little bit later on. And some of them have actually brought the books that they've written themselves. But more on that story a little bit later on. Let's take a quick break.